It's time, ATM episode number 60. Martin Devlin back from France. The inimitable, indomitable Mark Watson, broadcaster of international class and quality, joining us. We're going to talk about the Rugby World Cup, the fallout from Ian Foster's legacy. The Black Ferns can't pull a crowd. Cricket World Cup, can we still make the semis? The Kiwis, what a great result. Why no crowd for that? VAR and TMO if we get bloody time.
Apologise to me!
Kicking it off, Watto, with Angelo Mathews and that bizarre dismissal overnight, Sri Lanka versus Bangladesh. Is that dirty, Paul? It looked to me like it was.
Oh, look, absolutely. It goes back to what I often say, mate, that, yeah, legally you're correct, but just so morally corrupt. I mean, you know, Angela Mathews explained the situation out there. Bangladesh didn't seem to really be overly concerned by the excuse or the reasons, and found a way to try and win this game, I think, which fell well and truly outside of the spirit of the game. I'm just disappointed it just wasn't an Australian that was batting what happened to the Aussies, because they wouldn't have had a leg to stand on off the Bairstow situation in the UK, where they just basically said, well, it's in the rules, it's in the rules. So I'm just disappointed it wasn't Australian, because, boy, it would have been great to see how the Australians reacted in a situation like that. Look, it's a shame, isn't it? I mean, cricket's one of those games where most of the time you're not talking about the umpire after a game. A batsman is what you're celebrating, or a bowler, or individual, or some collective performances. And that, yeah, I mean, you come to a Cricket World Cup and this is a major talking point now. And
unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean,
it's unnecessary. That's what it was. It's completely unnecessary.
And the umpires have no choice. They've got to follow the rules. That's the thing. It's the rules, and they've got to go.
Yeah, but hang on a second. Okay, well, let's segue into this then, because I was watching Tottenham versus Chelsea today, and once again the whole game is disrupted by VAR. And you've got human eyes looking at technology, which means it's not about technology, it's about humanity, because it's humans that are reading the technology, and they're reading it wrong in a lot of cases. We got VAR, meaning that the first half of that game was 55 minutes long because the game had to stop while so many things are checked. With the TMO absolutely wrecking the spectacle that was the Rugby World Cup final. We have got the bunker getting decisions manifestly wrong throughout the NRL Rugby League semi-finals. None of this is providing an answer, is it? I mean, technology works for me in tennis because it's in or it's out. Goalline technology works because it's over the line or not. As far as cricket goes, I don't like the DRS and in terms of the leg before decisions, because I believe the umpire's in the best position to actually decide that, and I can't work out how any kind of technology can fundamentally 100% prove that a ball bouncing on this piece of grass is going to be exactly the same as it was when it bounced on that piece of grass. But this technology in these other sports, Mark, I mean, is it time that we just pulled the handbrake up and said, forget it? Forget it. Human error is always going to be prevalent in all of these games. Just get on with it and accept it.
Or otherwise just simply reduce it to what it was always brought in for. So goal line technology for football. I always felt that the touch judges and football, the linesmen in football, were brilliant in terms of their ability to get the offsides. And if it comes down to centimetres, I think people can forgive that. There's always going to be a blunder. When it comes to, I think Steve Hansen summed up the TMO in rugby, isn't it? I mean, the game is not refereed on replay, and it's not refereed in slow motion. TMO in rugby should be simply there to decide whether a ball's been dotted down or not, and that's where it should be left. And it's just encroaching on the game now. No one's enjoying it. Who is the referee? I mean, is it the guy in the middle, or is it the guy upstairs, or is it the two guys running the touchline? And it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's just so over policed now. It's just so over regulated. Look, I mean, it's the problem is these days, isn't it, that there's going to be somebody at home, and there's going to be a television company using technology to prove or not whether or not the referee is right or wrong. If we were to get rid of it, the television companies would go in and go, well, actually, our technology says it was offside and the referee got it wrong, and then the referees end up getting maligned and stuff. So I think there's a place for it, but we've just got to reduce the use of it. We've actually got to say, okay, what are the definitive areas in which we can use technology? It's funny, isn't it, with the DRS? I mean, when I was growing up, if a ball was heading down remotely down leg side on an LBW decision, it was never ever given out. It just wasn't. It's traveling down leg, it's not out. These days they get hit on the pads and it's going to just clip half the stump on the leg stump and it's given out, LBW. And it's like, well, back in my day, mate, that was not out.
That's
There's
it.
no way it was
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
And I'm with you on it. I mean, one thing I will say, at least with the DRS, it seems to be a very consistent algorithm that is used. It doesn't seem to vary too much. It just simply uses a mathematical formula, and it will factor in what the pitch is doing, because it will do a little bit of an analysis in terms of the bounce on the particular wicket, and then it will adjust accordingly. So I don't have a problem with DRS, but I mean, we could get rid of the LBW decisions and leave it up to the umpires.
No, I totally agree with
at
you.
times.
Yeah,
But then, as long as you've got neutral umpires, I don't never like the fact that you're in Australia with Australian umpires, you're in India with Indian umpires, or even if maybe you travel down here and said, well, New Zealand umpires, however they might be perceived. But yeah, look, it's all just gone too far. I mean, the game's just constantly stopped, isn't it? Constant analysis. And then we just finish a game, and all we ever talk about now is the refereeing and
boring.
the decisions.
Bloody boring.
And it's not just in rugby now; it's in football as well. We saw Arteta last week with Arsenal and Newcastle, and all it is about the controversies. And it's not, as a fan, as what I want. And who wants to be a referee now? And it just comes back to the use of it. I think there is a place for it, but 99% of it still needs to be, the decisions need to be made by the guy in the middle. And I think the referees they now know that they don't actually have to be that alert because there's someone covering their back. Or I think if you took it away, I think their senses would be greater heightened, and I think they would become, a lot more diligent when refereeing around certain areas. And perhaps in time they have become just a little bit of lackadaisical because, hey, there's someone there in the background to adjudicate on those things.
Apologise to me!
Let's rock through the rest of the topics, which are the Rugby World Cup fallout from. I detect since coming back to New Zealand, it's a little bit like post-2019 that, the All Blacks lose, and we've kind of accepted it now. People just don't overreact like they used to. We've lost a lot of that sheer anger that used to erupt when the All Blacks lost it at Rugby World Cup. I suppose over the last few years, this is what this team has shown us. They've shown us that they do lose matches. They've got a host of unwanted records. At that Rugby World Cup, the truth of the matter is we played 3 tough games and we only won one of them. We lost to France and South Africa. The Argentinian game was as much of a training run as the other 3 pool matches. And that's where the All Blacks are at and have been at for the last few years, Mark, that we win the odd game, but we lose as many as we actually win.
Yeah, for this to be a successful World Cup campaign, we needed to win it. I'll say that we played 4 tough tests, because I'll include the South African test 2 weeks prior. And so we've lost 3 out of 4 tough tests. And yes, we played brilliantly against Ireland. But that, unfortunately, has been very much the script of Ian Foster's All Blacks, just that lack of consistency. And we've said it over the last 3 years. How can you expect to win big games when, and Justin Marshall's been hot on this as well, when you've never been consistently picking the same side or given the same team the opportunity to play 3 or 4 big tests in a row because rest and rotation or giving the wider squad a bit of a run. I think there is apathy now around the All Blacks. I think, if you lose enough, you start to accept it. Always remember when Auckland Rugby for a long period of time went unbeaten, and then they lost for the first time, and there was a major outcry. Auckland have lost, this great record starting to come to an end, and then they lost a second time and a third time, and we slowly accept it, don't we? And then it sort of becomes the norm. Look, I think New Zealand needed to find some solace in that loss, and so therefore the discussion's been around the TMO. And look, the TMO was awful. There were some inconsistencies in there, but it's a game we should have won. There were kicks on offer we didn't take. There were kicks that we missed. I mean, South Africa were basically going into that final running on fumes, and we still couldn't get the job done. And incredibly frustrating. And for those reasons, it's a failed campaign for me. I love the island. I love the fact we got through to the final, but it was just this World Cup that was actually just set up for us to win, and we couldn't get the job done. And I'll say this, if you're Argentina and you get through to the final and you lose by a point, I mean, you're probably going to have a ticker tape parade. Not dissimilar when the New Zealand men's basketball team finished 4th at the Basketball World Championships back in 2004, and what a moment for New Zealand basketball. For the United States, that's failure. And for the All Blacks, to me, second is failure, and it should always be failure. Ireland don't have the World Cup. Australia don't have the World Cup, but we don't have the World Cup either. Yes, we made the final, but so what? We still don't have it. And, and as I've said, we put all our eggs in one basket now. And now it's been 8 years since we've won a Rugby World Cup. But what's happened in between? Well, we've accepted losing to Argentina. We've accepted losing to Ireland. We've accepted losing a home series to the Irish. We've accepted that players can be pulled out of Super Rugby. We've accepted rest and rotation. We've accepted players being put into positions. And Justin Marshall's 100% right under Ian Foster. Ian, you sense with Foster that he's just one of the best players on the park. I mean, I don't think for a moment Scott Robertson's going to have Rieko Ioane playing at centre next year in his All Black team. I just cannot see that happening. And so, look, it's a failed campaign, in my opinion. I was like you, Martin. I was just so desperately hoping we would win it. I felt incredibly deflated. Look, it wasn't through a lack of effort. I'm not going to say the TMOs didn't play their part, but we should have still won that game. You take the points on offer. I heard interviews that you did with Sir John Kerwin, that you did with Justin Marshall, that you did with Sean Fitzpatrick, who all said those things, and we couldn't get it done. We got another player sent from the field. We had another yellow card. Yes, should South Africa have been down to 14 in the second half? Absolutely. It's an area that World Rugby need to address. If you're going to have that sort of a level of involvement from the TMO, then they need to be 100% consistent and they need to be 100% accurate. But when it's all said and done, Martin, from a year from now, South Africa's name's etched on the trophy. We're not. I think that the brand around the All Blacks, which is our selling point of precision performance and no compromise, has been compromised under Ian Foster. Look, I think Ian Foster as a person is an absolute gentleman, loveliest guy. I thought he conducted himself brilliantly throughout the entire World Cup. He's always conducted himself well. I think the way he's been treated by New Zealand rugby is appalling in terms of that relationship. So there's a lot of empathy that I do have for Ian Foster, but purely from a coaching point of view, I'm just so pleased that the Henry Hansen and Foster era is behind us. I think it went 4 years too far. I think they all had their place, and I think they all had their, they all, throughout our history, they came in at the right times, but it just went too far. And so I think the only thing we as rugby fans have looked forward to next year, I'm not excited by Super Rugby, is to really see the team that Scott Robertson picks and how this All Black team goes under Scott.
Apologise to me!
Finally, and then quickly, the Kiwis, brilliant win, couldn't pull a crowd though. The Black Ferns, well, we've been saying this, you and me, for a year, and we've been the only media voices that have been saying it. The truth is, there was no explosion, there is no growth. That women's rugby's in the same position it was before the World Cup last year. Same as women's football. These two tournaments bring people out because they have glamour and glitz attached, and we're just absolutely saturated with the blanket coverage across all media, which is bought and paid for by World Rugby and by FIFA. But when it comes to what happens next, well, we've got a Black Ferns side that sold out Eden Park that can't sell out Mount Smart against an England team replaying that cup final. We've got a Phoenix women's team that barely get mums and dads going along. This is where women's sport is in this country, and I'm sick to death of having it rammed down my throat that all of a sudden that we are meant to be watching this, we should be watching this. Who the hell is it that isn't watching it? And it's not you and me, mate. It is all the people that went to those finals, and that's where the finger's got to be pointed. How come you want to go and watch that, but you don't want to watch the domestic product?
Look, you put World Cup around anything and people are going to go for a novelty factor, mate. Look, I was last week up at the Asian Para Games, most magnificent stadium on a Saturday, mate. The stadium filled up. There must have been 50 or 60,000 people in it. They weren't there because they're interested in para athletics. They were there because it was the Asian Para Games and all these countries were there, and it was presented beautifully, and it was a bit of a novelty, and there was a real curiosity around it. And that's what happens with any major event that comes to our shores. It's about capitalising on it. Look, this has got nothing to do, people not watching women's rugby, it's got nothing to do with sexism, it's got nothing to do with chauvinism. The reality is, mate, the product's not good enough. It's a product that's in its infancy. It is a minority sport. And there needs to be studies done around why women in this country just don't seem to want to turn up and watch live sport. Or if they do turn up and watch live sport, why is it they possibly still prefer to watch the men's game? And as much as this feminist movement, which exists in a lot of our media, are so desperate to push their agenda and so desperate for this thing called equity and equality, the reality is, mate, it's a false narrative and it's a false economy. But look, I think too, and I keep saying this, Martin, when it comes to events now, as a nation, we have evolved. We're no longer just rugby, racing and beer. We're a country who celebrate our outdoors. We've got so many sports to choose from now. But I think in regards to entertainment, there's an oversupply and a lack of demand. And it's not just in a sporting sense. I know there was an AMP show on out at Clevedon over the weekend, and I had some friends that said they went out to that and couldn't believe the number of people that were out there watching that. And so, sport has to be better and has to be more entertaining. We've talked about this, the quality of food, the cost to get in. See, Women's Rugby World Cup were brilliant last year in terms of their pricing structure. They made it $5 and $10 to get in, so they weren't over the top and it was affordable. But I think they've created this problem themselves, because the last year they were telling us that the Women's Rugby World Cup final was getting more cut through and there was more interest in it, the Men's World Cup final from 2015, and we're having all this sort of propaganda shoved down our throat. And me and you know that, look, at the end of the day, this was never going to be sustainable. People are not going to go and watch this team. They're not going to go and watch a lot of women's sport like football, like rugby. However, I will say this, and I keep saying it, I think sports like women's track and field on par with the men's. I think women's swimming on par with the men's. A lot of the women's golf you watch these days, in terms of the quality, on par with the men's stuff. But there are just certain sports that are still in their infancy and they need time to grow. But you're right, it's amazing how silent the media have been around this. Big article on BBC from the English captain talking about the lack of crowds that are turning up to watch. But it's not just women's sport. I mean, where was the crowd for the Kiwis? Why take it to Hamilton in the first place? But where was the crowd for the Kiwis? That should have been a sellout. I mean, it's been a wonderful year for rugby league. I don't know, did everybody just believe the Kangaroos were going to thump the Kiwis like they had done the week before? No one's watching the Phoenix. Crowd numbers for cricket are right down. The only team that still seem to be selling out is when the All Blacks do play. And then I'll argue that's going to end up in times, not necessarily it'll sell out, but it's not going to sell out in the first 6 weeks. So, look, I think sport's got some real challenges in this country. As I said, you go to a couple of sports games and you go, well, been there, done that. What else is out there to stimulate me? What else is different? But also I think the comfort of home, the big screen televisions, the convenience of it all. I think live sport's got some real challenges, which then, Martin, puts the economic model of sport at risk. How do we pay our players if no one's turning up and no one's watching this? And, I just want some balance from our media. Why can't we just come out and be honest and say, look, rugby is still at a women's level. With what we've seen, it's actually still just an amateur game and it should remain an amateur game. And if you want to play, you're playing because you want to play for the black jersey and potentially maybe picking up some endorsements privately because companies do want to align themselves with women's rugby.
Devlin.
Words matter.
I was going to excuse me.
The platform.